Good morning and welcome to SCSA Toolbox Tuesday. My name is Justin Brooks, Safety Advisor for the SCSA, and I'll be presenting today's Toolbox talk on eye injury prevention. Before I start the presentation, I just want to take a moment to discuss a few items before we get going. This presentation is being recorded and will be available for later viewing on our Facebook and YouTube channel. So, if you're not following our social media accounts, make sure that after this presentation, you give this video a like and a share, and follow our pages to keep up to date with safety in Saskatchewan. So today I will be talking about eye injury prevention. So let me just get my screen shared. You will see a picture of my two wonderful puppies and we will start the show. All right, so here we go. Eye injury prevention. Eye injuries are 100% preventable, yet they account for a number of workplace injuries in Saskatchewan. The purpose of this presentation is to outline an employer's duties in preventing eye injuries and to explain the risk factors when eye and face protection and other control measures are required, how to choose suitable and approved eye face protection when required, and how to recognize and treat eye injuries. The Occupational Health and Safety Regulations 2020 require an employer to supply approved eye and/or face protectors and ensure workers use them in workplaces where workers' eyes may become irritated or injured from flying particles, splashes, ultraviolet, or infrared radiation. Who's at risk? In Saskatchewan, welders account for the greatest proportion of eye injuries. Workers who perform tasks that generate flying particles, so that's grinding, sanding, cutting, chiseling, hammering, sawing, smelting, all the above, are also at high risk of sustaining an eye injury. The highest proportion of eye injuries occur in the manufacturing and construction sectors. Across all sectors, high-risk activities include drilling, spraying, or mixing. Typically, males and employees under the age of 30 account for the majority of eye injury claims. How do they occur? Once engineering controls have been established, review these controls on a regular basis to ensure they're still in compliance with regulations and to identify if better solutions become available. Administrative controls. Administrative controls such as the following need to be considered. So removing a substance from the workplace, so like a chemical, right? Or substituting with something less hazardous. Good preventative maintenance procedures on certain tools, well, technically on all tools, but certain tools have more of a risk. Things like chisels and hammers, which using a really old hammer or striking an old hammer against an old chisel can cause them to flake off, spall, and create an eye injury, and a very serious one at that. This lessens the potential, again, of those metal fragments being dislodged. Keeping workers at a distance from eye hazards such as radiation, right? Or really any eye hazards. If someone's on the table saw, don't just stand there without protection on because you think that you don't need it because you're not the one cutting, right? So if there's people like that around that are gawking at the saw or anything else you're doing, get them out of there. Or have them put on safety glasses, I guess. Probably get them out of there if they're not helping. Personal protective equipment, eye and face protection. So eye and face protection can be used to supplement more effective controls or when more effective controls are not reasonably practicable. So for example, constructing an expensive enclosure on a dust generating procedure may not be reasonably practicable if it's only done once a year during shutdown, right? So all control measures must be integrated into well-developed and implemented safe work procedures and training. This is critical to preventing eye injuries. Additional control measures for radiation hazards. The Radiation Health and Safety Regulations, so of 2005, set out the requirements with respect to radiation hazards, including requirements for a laser to have a label indicating its classification and the corresponding hazard. These regulations also set out the qualifications required to operate lasers. Choosing suitable and adequate eye and face protection. So the first thing you do is you got to identify the hazards. What can possibly hurt you? So survey the workplace to determine which eye hazards exist and ask questions like, does the operation have the potential to generate dust, flying particles, molten metal, chemical splashes? Is UV or ultraviolet radiation exposure a concern? Is it on site at all? Check the labels, safety data sheets, and other information sources to determine if a substance or radiation source presents a hazard to the eyes. So for example, Can it have toxic, corrosive, or irritative effects on the eyes? Does it produce easily recognized acute effects or hard to recognize cumulative or chronic effects that develop over time? And can it penetrate or be absorbed into the eye? That's very important. Then assess the risks. Assess the likelihood of workers coming into contact with the hazard and the nature and extent of the consequences. This is considering how the work is done. So, for example, are there any particles or gases, vapors, radiation hazards? Are they likely to reach the worker's eye? Is the risk restricted to the eyes, or does the rest of the face or respiratory passages also need protection? So the rest of the face, this is like grinding, right? Using a grinder. Can workers in the vicinity of radiation or other hazards be exposed to a harmful extent? Where the assessment indicates a need for eye or face protection to supplement the use of other controls or where used alone, the employer needs to select appropriate and adequate approved protection. Where eye protection is being relied upon, it must be suitable and approved eye protection. This is required by sections 121 and 7.8 of the regulations. In Saskatchewan, safety eyewear is considered approved if the supplier indicates that it meets the most recent edition of the standard SCSA, like Canadian Standards Association, Z94.3 eye and face protectors. So make sure you're checking regularly with the CSA for updates. Some highlights of the most recent 2020 edition of the CSA Z94 include addition of lasers and arc flash hazards and provisions for protection, revised optical requirements for Plano eyewear with non-prescription reading segments, revised specifications for head form used for impact and penetration tests, updated the Table 5 outlining provisions for types of lenses presumed to be compliant with this standard, and clarification of the points of impact for face shields and welding protectors. Selecting the eye and face protection based on the hazard, right? You have to do that. So some of the information on the screen you're going to see is a bunch of different eye and face protection. You have to choose it based on what a hazard is. So under no circumstance, though, are regular eyeglasses to be considered as suitable for approved eye protection. In the environments where industrial eye protection is required, contact lenses should not be worn except under special medical circumstances. If an individual's medical circumstances require that contact lenses be worn in such environments, eye protection must also be used. For more information on the selection, again, please refer to Table 6 of the CSA Standards Z94.3 116 Guideline for the Selection, Use, and Care of Eye and Face Protectors. No maintenance. To help prevent injuries, employers need to ensure eye and face protection equipment is maintained and stored in a way that limits scratching or dirt buildup. Dirty or scratched protectors will inhibit the field of view, and this may result in workers not using them or removing them. It's especially important that gold welding shades be frequently inspected, as they're prone to scratching. Small scratches on the surface of these shades allow for UV radiation to penetrate, exposing the worker to harmful radiation. Scratched gold shades must be replaced immediately if they're scratched. Employers need to inform workers on the nature and degree of eye hazards and how to recognize symptoms. Some of this information can usually be found on the safety data sheets, so your SDS for the product. Employers need to ensure written emergency response procedures are in place. Employers need to ensure emergency supplies and equipment, as well as first aid personnel and supplies, are provided and readily available. Workers must be trained on what to do in the event of an eye injury and their role in responding to eye injuries of coworkers. Immediate attention to eye injury is crucial and can prevent serious and permanent damage. Eyes exposed to chemical splashes must be immediately flushed at an eye wash station with large volumes of lukewarm water for at least 15 to 20 minutes. In Saskatchewan workplaces, employers are required to provide at readily accessible locations approved equipment to flush the eyes where there may be a risk of eye injury from corrosive or other substances. Approved eye wash equipment means that it meets the requirements set out by the American National Standards Institute, ANSI. Standard for emergency eye wash and shower equipment, longer flushing times of 60 minutes may be required with severe alkali or acid burns. Seek medical attention as soon as possible. A portable eye wash bottle should be used to continuously flush the worker's eye while on the way to the hospital or other medical facility. These bottles can also be distributed through the workplace to use as to use on the way to an eye wash station. So you can start pumping that water in on your way while someone's guiding you, or again to the hospital. Going to get messy in the vehicle, but maybe have a pail sitting with it so that they can sit over a pail as they flush their eyes to just not saturate themselves in the vehicle as well. Fine particles. A particle is small and loose, may be removed gently by gently flushing the eye with large volumes of water as described in the previous page. In some rare cases, a particle may be flushed out by tears. If the object cannot be removed through flushing or it's embedded in the eye, make sure that nothing touches the eye. That's very important. Cover the eye appropriately and take the worker to a hospital. Welder's flash is the most common eye injury resulting from exposure to radiation produced during welding operations. It can also result when workers' eyes are exposed to direct sunlight, or even the reflection off water or snow, or radiation from certain types of lamps, so tanning lamps, photographer flood lamps, etc. The onset of symptoms is usually seen within 6 to 8 hours after exposure and may include light sensitivity, a grainy feeling over the eyes, watering, blurred vision, or pain. This is also known as something like welder's flash, right? Medical treatment should be sought at the hospital and includes the use of drops and eye dressing. Exposure to IR radiation from high heat sources, so like molten metal, may cause severe, irreversible burns in the eye. In the event that this type of injury happens, apply ice and take the worker directly to the hospital. Exposure to UV and IR radiation can, over the long term, result in cardiac formation. Lasers that emit visible or near infrared light can damage the retina. If the wavelength of the laser's beam is in the far infrared or ultraviolet regions of the spectrum, the damage affects the cornea and lens. Certain tasks or substances that are hazardous to the eye can also be hazardous to the respiratory tract or skin. For example, some of these tasks may also result in workers inhaling gases, vapors, mists, fumes, other particles that can cause injury to the lungs. Refer to the SDS first, right off the bat. It will give specific information about the chemical and the proper respiratory protective devices. Most often, the SDS will refer to the CSA standard. So again, that CSA standard is Z94-3. To determine if the respiratory protective device you need also meets the standard for approved eye protection. Bystander protection. So when assessing the hazard and risk to workers, it's important to assess the risk of exposure to workers in adjacent areas as well. If there's reasonable likelihood of exposure to chemicals, particles, UV or IR radiation or lasers, the employer must also ensure the protection of these workers. This is a big thing with welding. This is something that you'll see quite a bit on site, welding in pan stairs or welding steel columns and beams and stuff like that. Any welding that needs to be done there. You'll turn a corner and all of a sudden, tap, tap, that welding rod hits. And if you're not wearing the proper protection, you could have an injury. So some legislation. So again, that general responsibilities under legislation, the use of equipment required in 711. It's not reasonably practicable to protect the health and safety of workers by design of the plant and work processes, suitable work practices or administrative controls. An employer or contractor shall ensure that every worker wears or uses suitable and adequate personal protective equipment. So what this is saying is if you can't control the hazard and that hazard is directly related to the eyes or face, you need to supply PPE and the workers are required to wear them. Eye and face protectors in 781. So if there's a risk of irritation or injury to the face or eyes of a worker from flying objects, particles, splashing liquids, molten metal, or ultraviolet, visible or infrared radiation, an employer contractor shall again provide the industrial eye or face protectors and require the worker to use them. So that's just kind of a little outline of some of the dangers. And then eye flushing equipment in 2112. If there may be a risk to the eyes of a worker from corrosive or other harmful substances, an employer contractor shall provide at readily accessible locations approved equipment to flush the eyes of the worker with lukewarm water or another appropriate liquid. An appropriate liquid doesn't mean Gatorade, okay? Some of them are a saline solution or something of the sort, right? Or plumbed in water. It has to be clean, has to be like water. Not Gatorade, not Kool-Aid, like water. Perfect. All right, well, this concludes our SCSA Toolbox Tuesday. I'd like to take a moment to thank all of you. By watching and participating in these discussions, we're all working together, making Saskatchewan the safest construction environment in Canada. I also want to take a moment to remind everyone that we have all our presentations available on our YouTube channel. So just go to that little bar at the top, type SCSA, and make sure you follow our page. All these videos are a fantastic resource for training in Toolbox Talks. Just a reminder, again, like and share, and follow us on all the social media platforms to stay up to date with safety in Saskatchewan. That's it. That's my time. Have a great day, everyone, and work safe.